Well, violence against women is in the spotlight as always in this country, with the latest murder being that of student Precious Ramabulana. The 21-year-old was stabbed over 50 times on the eve of the launch of the 16 Days of Activism for No Violence Against Women and Children campaign. The campaign, of course, being observed in this country for almost 25 years. But is it really making a difference? And what kind of discussions do communities need to be having around issues of gender-based violence? To discuss this further, I'm joined tonight by gender activist Anele Mda. Anele, very good evening to you. Thank you for coming in. So, you hear stories like that of Precious Ramabulana, right? And it comes just a few months after we all were shocked and horrified and mourned the brutal murder of Anele Mda in that post office in the Western Cape. And just as you think that the conversations about how this needs to stop are bearing fruit, you then hear the story of another young woman murdered. How do we keep going as a country?
First of all, Thembekile, thank you for having us. First of all, I would love to convey my personal, sincere condolences to the family, because no family has to experience such, especially from having seen your child coming up and having a hope that one day they will become a better person. And there comes a man who takes away that precious gift that you were waiting for to finally unravel and finally be unleashed to your family. And the question that you're asking, how do we then go forward? We need to ask very difficult questions. What kind of a people are we in communities first? What kind of individuals in our private spaces are we? Because it's okay and easy for us to say government, but what is it that we are doing in our individual spaces? What kind of projection do we display in our conduct and our behaviors that makes our societies to be societies that embrace and make young people and young girls in particular to feel safe? I mean, if you are looking at the Precious Ramabulana situation, it's exactly the way the situation of Anele Mda and many other girls, by the way, whose stories have never rolled in front of cameras because no one have raised their names. But if you are not safe in your own private space, because there is a narrative that sometimes is driven that says, no, if she was raped in a club, what was she doing in a club? If you can never be guaranteed of your safety as a young woman, even in your private space, what exactly are we saying as adults in our communities to young people? And the other question that must be asked, which is very difficult by our fellow men, is what message are we sending to the young boys that are coming up, who are becoming the next generation of leaders in our societies? And for me, the conversation must change from saying that government is not doing enough. We will never, of course, say government is doing enough when they are not doing enough. But we must look at ourselves. We must scrutinize our behaviors and ask the difficult question that, am I projecting the right behavior? Am I projecting the right attitude that makes a young woman in my presence and in my surrounding feel safe and feel that there is no harm that can happen on me which is not intended? And
I want to come in there, Anele, and talk about the culpability of communities. I mean, we talk often about the people who use abusive language towards or against women. We talk about those who beat them, those who stab them and murder them, and those who are guilty of rape. But are we having enough of a conversation about how you and I and many others have perhaps been culpable because we've seen a woman being slapped outside a club by a boyfriend in our communities, being abused verbally, and we turn the other way? I mean, I mentioned this at the start of our show last night, that often some of us have said, you know, it's the first time he's beat Anele, so therefore he's not an abuser. Almost as though that to be an abuser, Thembekile has to beat you multiple times.
You see, that's exactly the culture that we have created, that we have built, that we have nurtured, that we have normalized. It is that culture that let's forgive Thembekile today because it was just this once. Tomorrow we're going to say, no, it was because of the alcohol. The next day we'll be like, no, it was because of the people that he was with on that day. We've become a society that has created a certain level of excusable behaviors that we want to always cover and portray as though it's not that bad. And that talks to the kind of people that we are. And it talks on the lack of reflection that we are not doing as a society, as members of society, and be able to look ourselves in the mirror and see if the picture that is reflecting of you, of me, is the picture that indeed will make a young person standing next to me feel safe when they're around me. If anything is happening to your child, why can't I jump? If something is happening to my daughter, why can't you stand, regardless of who her mother is, who her father is? Rise, because it is a societal obligation. Rise because it is a right thing to do. We need to change our behaviors and our habits that we've normalized to make it a norm in our society, that brutality and violence has become a way of life.
And the crime stats came out, of course, a few months ago, and everyone was
alarming,
gasping quite necessarily because they were shocking. 2,930 women were murdered in South Africa between 2017-18, and these are the killings that are recorded as murders in this country. We know that there's a lot that goes on where sometimes things aren't captured as they should. And when you look at the reading of these numbers, you'd expect that it would jolt us into action, but it never seems to last. Why is that?
You know, I'm not sure whether you have observed this, Thembekile. There is a sweeping, tendency of complacency and the occasional kind of attitude about the killing, the shocking killing of women, which get only to last for 24 hours. And then after that, it's back to normal. I mean, as you were saying earlier on, how did we arrive to a point where we are now talking about Precious just after Uinene Mrtoto? You would think that the Uinene Mrtoto kind of a shock was an awakening, fear to every one of us to say, no, man, we can't have girls being, scavenged like this. But no. 2 months later, we are talking about Precious, who, has got 52 wounds, stab wounds on her body after being raped. For what? That is the kind of society where everything that is wrong is just for a very little while that we are outraged by it. It's so okay that, no, they must experience it. But the real question is, when it happens to you, when it's closer home, will you again have that kind of an attitude? Or you will begin to realize that this is no playing game. This is a real situation that we are faced with. And by the way, no one can escape this thing. This monster is inescapable. And
on closer to home, there's a point that's often made about some of the gender activists that I follow on social media and some of the conversations that you see happening among women online, because when we talk about some of the messaging in the past on gender-based violence, you hear messages about real men don't do blah, blah, blah. But the reality is the killer, the man who killed Uinene Mrtoto, is a very real man. He's not some weird animal that grew up in an area secluded from humanity. He's a man who grew up like many other killers in our communities. His abusive behavior probably spotted earlier, excused or whatnot. So we also need to rework, wouldn't you say, the messaging that men who do commit these abuses are some anomaly because they're very real.
In fact, we even get to a point where we give these men that are rapists, that are perpetrators of gender-based violence, names like, he's a dog, it's some monster. No, it's a corporate gentleman who is in beautiful suits like you, Thembekile, who in the circle of his people, he will never look like any of the things that he does when the doors are closed. And it starts with the correct capturing and the correct recognition of these loopholes that we create. I once said in an interview with one activist who said that, no, those men are sick. And I asked her a question, who says they are sick? Because that's, again, an acceptable excuse that we create for ourselves, that we want to label this person in order for us to remove the fact that there's nothing abnormal about what this person is doing. They know that they are very normal when they're doing it. They are not sick. But when we create these excusable covers, it's for us to really label them in a manner that will create that an environment that says there's really something abnormal about this. You don't need to bother that much. And that is exactly why 10 years after Charlize Theron had given a futuristic focus that in South Africa, 10 years later, this is the state that women will find themselves in. And we have come to realize those words, which are very much unfortunate. And it's a very disappointing nature, because it means that there are people who are around these perpetrators who create excusable explanations for them and on their behalf, not allowing them to face their demons, accept their misforgivings, and be able to take a stand to change their ways.
And I want to bring in another element as we conclude our conversation, because there was a thing that happened online as well on Twitter where there were names of men submitted anonymously, men who had either beaten, raped or abused women in other ways. Yes, some of it, we were told, were false allegations made against certain people.
True.
That's good and well, but it says something about the failure in the system, doesn't it, when people have to resort to measures such as that, where we now have to resort to a public platform such as Twitter, where you submit a name in the hope of getting some justice and hoping the society will shun your abuser. And then I also want to throw in a second element to that and ask you about the rehabilitation of abusers. Your thoughts on that and how it should happen?
All right. On the first aspect, Thembekile, I think that, first of all, we must condemn any attempt by any woman who would want to accuse a person falsely, knowing that they have not raped or done anything untoward to them, and use such a very important and a very degrading and a very it's a very painful experience. It's something that you can't mock. It's something that you can't use for a cheap PR publicity kind of stunt. It's a very serious matter. So for me, it demonstrates that some people think that this can be a point-scoring exercise, which it cannot be. For those men, I think we must, all of us, say shame on them, because it just begins to show that even amongst us as women, there are women who would do anything just to create, falsehood about people, and that is not a very good thing to do, because some of these accusations, in fact, an accusation of someone that has raped you when they have not, it can cost them a job, it can cost them a whole lot. So it can't be done, and it's wrong, and it must never be condoned, because it should not come and dumb down the issue of the rape in this country, because it's a serious one.
But
the
at its core, for the real people who are hoping for some sort of retribution on that platform, are saying it speaks to how the system has failed them to an extent. If
Absolutely.
Social media has become your only hope.
Absolutely. Remember, when we are talking about rape victims and people that have been exposed to gender-based violence, we're talking about people who, most of the time, it's my word against yours. So the first thing that they go through is, will I be believed? So the system that we have, which government needs to review, is a system that always talks about what? Evidence. And of course, evidence must be provided, because if we are going to accuse people without evidence, it means everyone will be a rapist in this country. But that said, we must have a system that is cognizant of the shortcomings in that. For instance, if you're saying I'm saying my daughter who's 2-year-old has been raped, are you going to say I must bring proof when the private parts are there to showcase that, to demonstrate that something has been forcibly done here? And this is a child who's not even sexually active at this point in time. But on the other end, the fact that people resort to platforms like social media, it's really a deep-seated cry for help. It's a people that have reached all manners or all proportions of desperation. They've gone to a point where nothing else matters as long as I have unburdened myself, as long as emotionally I've drained myself out of this hole that I've been. I mean, Zolani Mahola, for instance, freshly crowned frontline singer, 30 years, a person was raped when she was 8, only to come out now at 38 and speak about an ordeal of 30 years. That is not something that the system can be able to capture and trace. And hence I'm saying that our current justice system, it fails us in as far as SAPS is concerned. It fails us in as far as NPA is concerned. It fails us in as far as the non-uniformity of convictions. I mean, you will find a person who has raped being given 5 years and that they are suspended. You'll find another rapist being given 3 life sentences with no option of parole for 25 years. So what is happening with why there is this discord? Why is there this this ununiformity in the sentences that are being given? That's where the government. We have to wrap,
but I want to put to you that question. I realize I made it quite long when I put them into one.
All right.
The question about the abusers. Do we rehabilitate them and bring them back into the same communities, or should we get rid of them altogether?
We can't get rid of them because there is no world for rapists. There's no world for criminals. They are part of the society. But what needs to happen is that our conversations as individuals in our private spaces, what we say in public must be the same conversation. We must not have double standards where your wrongness in private becomes correct because no one sees us. When we're in public, then we begin to just no, Thembekile, you can't do that because we now have got other people that can see us. We need to be genuine individuals. We need to be genuine people who are cognizant of their behaviors, because our behaviors inform the societal change.
Anele Mda, we could have this conversation all night, but thank you so much for coming in tonight. That was gender activist Anele Mda speaking to us during the 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children. When Nightline continues, we'll get perspective from a cultural